that they're coinciding here in the Hudson Valley right now. In fact, they're working on a piece that they'll be speaking about just north of here in Hudson, where Jonah and his company have a residency. So we're lucky for that reason to have them just physically, but also for a few other reasons which I want to say a few words about, and also about how what they're doing relates to what you're doing. Then I'll introduce both of them and turn the table over to them, and we'll have time at the end for questions and answers, so please take notes physically or mentally as we proceed. The second reason that I think we're particularly lucky to have them is because the work that they're doing together right now, this is the first time that they're collaborating on a piece, and the work that they're doing together right now is happening now. It's going to premiere September 5th at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And so that means that you're seeing artists and you're hearing from artists who are engaged right now in a collaboration. And as a friend of mine said, his favorite work is always the work that's still in the studio. So although we aren't actually seeing the work, we're seeing the artists working on something that's still in the studio, and that in itself is exciting. And then also, as I mentioned, there are ways in which what they do individually and what they're doing together connects to the sort of things that you're doing, and that's what I wanted to say something about. Anthony is variously referred to, Anthony McCall, Jonah Bokaer. Anthony is variously referred to as an installation artist, a filmmaker, a sculptor, a visual artist. Jonah is a dancer, a choreographer, a media artist, an activist. You can see just from the titles the titles used to describe them, that their work is that they work across traditional genres, across traditional disciplines. There's a constant crossing, challenging of received ways of cutting up aesthetic work and intellectual work generally. And that runs across film, sculpture, particularly in Anthony's work, relationships between film and sculpture, dance and media in Jonah's work, and I would say even more importantly, they challenge not just habitual conceptions of genre, but habitual ways of seeing, hearing, and thinking. Their work, when you experience one of their works, it's immediately a challenge to what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're thinking about. And that's one of the reasons why, I think one of the reasons why they were invited to do this collaboration. I should say it's a piece that's going to appear at, as I mentioned, the Brooklyn Academy of Music. The Brooklyn Academy is a huge organization, a couple of large spaces in Brooklyn, very important institution, as I'm sure many of you know, for the performing arts in New York. And they're just now, in the past few years, have decided to open a new space called the Fishman Space, which has nothing to do with fish, as far as I know, but is a small theater, flexible, 250 seats, I think, and it's not a proscenium like this, but it's rather a space that can be rearranged in a lot of different configurations. It allows for different interactions between audience and artist, and in a very fundamental way, challenges the way you perceive a performance, the way you perceive a work of dance, work of theater. So in choosing, this is the inaugural piece at the Fishman Center, they invited Jonah to make the first piece for that, and Jonah invited Anthony to collaborate with him. So in this instance too, the whole thing is about the whole collaboration, and the collaboration in this space is about crossing disciplines, genres, challenging habitual ways of thinking and seeing. And that, from my perspective, is a lot of what you're doing. My point is that if your work, and you may, for example, be taking a philosophical text, say Hannah Arendt's What is Freedom, and using a John Cage-inspired chance operation in which you drop paper clips on it and generate from that a poem, which you then perform at the reading on Thursday night. That is not a traditional way of dealing with the text, and what you see, what you experience from doing something like that is potentially something banal, but potentially something interesting and new. Likewise, you might be looking at the coral ode in the Antigone, and the great coral ode, many are the wonders, nothing more wondrous than man, and thinking about it as a philosophical treatise, maybe even writing it as a philosophical treatise about human nature, rewriting it, and then analyzing that. So in all of these ways, I think what Jonah and Anthony are doing is similar to things that you're doing these 3 weeks. And there are also ways in which what they're doing is very different from what you're doing. So what I'd encourage you to do as we proceed is to think about what's familiar and think about what's new in regard to what they're talking about. And the last thing that I want to say by way of introduction is to point to the sub-theme of the program this year. What does it mean to be human? Freedom and constraint. Freedom and constraint. When Jonah was asked to do this piece at the Fishman Space, he was constrained by a small theater, a 250-seat theater, and invited to make a performance. He invited Anthony to work with him on it, and Anthony was then constrained by the space and the awareness that there was going to be some dance piece that Jonah would be preparing. Anthony then designed the set, and they'll tell you much more about this. And Jonah's work with the choreography and the dance, his work with the dancers and his own choreography, was a response to the proposition, was constrained by the proposition that Anthony made. So that was one of the reasons we were particularly excited to have both Anthony and Jonah here. And I also wanted to let you know that Jonah has visited us 2 or 3 times in the past, thanks to Micah Pollock, who was our original connection to Jonah. So I just want to acknowledge Micah for bringing Jonah originally to Bard to meet us. The last thing I'll say is the sort of thing that you always say about such distinguished guests. We're lucky because they're extraordinary artists and also have been recognized throughout the world for their accomplishments. I just want to give you a sense, very briefly, I could do this for a long time, very briefly, who they are. Jonah Bokaer studied dance at Cornell and at North Carolina School of the Arts at the tender age of 18, which I assume some of you or many of you are. He joined one of the most important dance companies of the 20th century, the Merce Cunningham Company, and danced with them for a number, I think 7 or 8 years. At the same time, he was studying visual, and he was pursuing a degree in visual and media studies at the New School, and that highlights one of Jonah's particular interests, which is the intersection between technology and the human body. That's a frequent recurring theme in his performances. Jonah was the founder of an artist collective named Shea Bushwick, and also the co-founder of the Center for Performance Research, Shea Bushwick and the Center for Performance Research. I encourage you to look up their very interesting work online. You can find out more about it, and that's where, in part, where Jonah's work as an activist for artists who are working in unconventional ways, and also artists who don't have a lot of money. This is part of what Jonah's work makes possible for that kind of work to flourish. He has way too many awards and honors and fellowships for me to list. I'll say simply that he has danced and choreographed throughout the United States, New York, and throughout the world, Paris, Copenhagen, Bangkok, Bangalore. Look online and find out more. Anthony McCall, the rhyme was an accident. Anthony McCall has been making extraordinarily influential work since the early 1970s. Solid light installations is a simple way of explaining a major strain in his work. Sculpture that is formed by light, often film-projected light. Anthony's Line Describing a Cone, which was a 1973 piece, Line Describing a Cone, is one of the seminal works of 20th century film and visual art, and particularly the intersection of film and visual art. Anthony also had a long career as a graphic artist, and is currently, in the past 10 years or so, has been doing so many exhibitions of his installations and sculpture that I won't even try to list them. I'll just mention a few signal ones: the Serpentine Gallery in London, the Moderne Musik in Stockholm, a huge exhibition, very important exhibition, just opened in Berlin at the Hamburger Bahnhof, and soon a piece called Column, which is well, I won't tell you anything about it. Look it up, look up his work. He might tell you something about it. I'll just say that it's in northeastern England, and it was, it's an extraordinary piece, and they are extraordinary guests. Please welcome Anthony McCall and Jonah Bokaer.
As Tom said, my earliest work was with what I call solid light. These are installations made of projected drawings, really, which create planes of light which define the space in such a way that the visitor walks around them and finds their way to interact with them, and in certain ways they incorporate the spectator also, as you can see from this. This is an installation view from the show that just in Berlin that Thomas mentioned. And as you can see, the forms almost form architectural spaces and are capable of incorporating people looking at them. When Jonah first invited me to consider doing collaboration with him, I think we both assumed that I would create some kind of solid light forms for the theatre, for this quadrifrontal, four-sided space. But after thinking about it some, I decided this wasn't going to actually be that successful. One of the things about these solid light works are that they are actually quite delicate. The membranes of light have to be looked for and found. And you need to get close to them. They're quite tactile. People always reach out and touch them. But I had a problem, which is I would have to create a field of these planes of light, which would have to be vacated of the visitor in order to create a space for the dancer. So in a way, the jump that these works made from a normal cinematic projection was to throw the seats away and to create a kind of a sculptural field in which the spectator was expected to participate. And so I couldn't see any way of making these works legible to a seated audience. And that's when I began casting around to look at other themes that I've been playing with. For instance, before I began even making films, I was doing performances. These performances took place in the landscape and involved Bartscherer. There's a short clip from the film I made in '72.